is this guy? The mafia boss flew into jealousy when he saw his assistant dating. Neon lights flickered across the wet cobblestones, reflecting the lives of those who dared to walk under the weight of the night. At the very top of this city of whispers, in a tower that rose like a black monolith into the sky, sat Lucien Vera, the man everyone feared yet no one fully understood. Lucien was not a king by birth. He did not wear a crown, nor did he sit on a throne carved from gold. Yet his presence commanded the same respect and the same fear. The people below whispered his name as one would whisper a legend, a cautionary tale, or a prayer. They spoke of his intelligence, his ruthlessness, and the strange, almost mythic aura that clung to him like mist. From his penthouse, Lucien watched the city. His sharp eyes traced the paths of cars, the flickering silhouettes of people moving like shadows in a dance only he could see clearly. The night was quiet, save for the faint hum of life below, but his mind was far from calm. There was someone on his mind, someone who had a strange power over him, a force that he could not command or dominate. Her name was Ilara. She was more than his assistant, more than the right hand who kept his empire moving like clockwork. She was the one person who could enter his private chambers without fear, the only soul who had ever seen the man behind the cold, calculating mask. And yet, Lucien had never allowed himself to fully acknowledge the feelings she stirred in him, feelings that were not fear, respect, or loyalty, but something far more dangerous: longing. Tonight, however, Lucien's world shifted in a way that made his chest tighten. He had caught a glimpse of her earlier in the evening, laughing softly, her hand brushing against someone else's. The man was unfamiliar, a scholar named Kale, whose presence seemed oddly serene, almost fragile. He was the kind of person Lucien would normally dismiss with a cold glance or a single word. But something in the way Ilara looked at him, soft, warm, open, made Lucien's blood turn over in his veins. A strange, gnawing feeling rose in Lucien, one he hadn't experienced before. It was not fear, nor was it anger entirely. It was jealousy. Lucien leaned back in his chair, long fingers steepled beneath his chin. He observed the city below, but his thoughts were far away, tangled with images of Ilara and the mysterious scholar. He had never needed anyone before, not really. But now, seeing her drawn to another man, a strange, irrational urgency took root in him. The clock struck midnight. Lucien rose, moving toward the vast window that looked out over the city. Moonlight painted his sharp features in silver and shadow, and the city seemed to pause as if sensing the storm brewing inside him. He called her. When Ilara arrived, she was calm, poised, but Lucien could see the faintest flicker of curiosity in her eyes. She had grown used to his sudden summons, but tonight something in her demeanor felt different, almost cautious. "Kale," Lucien began without preamble, his voice smooth but firm, "I saw you speaking with someone tonight. I need to know who he is." Ilara tilted her head slightly as if she were considering how much to reveal. "He's a scholar, sir, Kale. He's been researching the old texts you asked for." Her voice was soft, steady, and yet it carried a tension that Lucien recognized. It was the same tension that people showed when standing too close to fire. They could feel the heat but were unsure if they wanted to move away. Lucien's gaze sharpened. A scholar. There was something beneath the simple words, a low rumble of warning. "Do you trust him?" Ilara hesitated just for a heartbeat. I don't know yet. He seems sincere." Lucien's jaw tightened. "Sincere is not always enough in this city, Ilara, you know that." His voice dropped, smooth and dangerous, like silk stretched over a blade. He stepped closer, the distance between them closing in a way that made her catch her breath. "And you must be careful who you allow close to you." Ilara looked at him, eyes wide. "Sir, are you worried about me?" Lucien froze, caught off guard. The words had a weight he had not anticipated. Worry? That was not a luxury he often allowed himself. Yet the truth was undeniable. He did worry about her, more than he had ever worried about anyone. and the thought of her being in danger, or worse, being taken from him by someone else, made his chest ache with a raw, unspoken longing. "I am not worried," he said finally, voice low, measured, but failing to hide the emotion beneath. "I am cautious. You must understand, Alara, the world you live in, it is not kind." Her gaze softened, understanding the unspoken layers in his words. "I know, sir, but I can handle myself." Lucian studied her, his sharp eyes tracing the lines of her face, the curve of her jaw, the faint shadow of worry in her eyes. And in that moment he felt something strange, an ache that was both desire and fear. He wanted to protect her, to keep her close, yet he feared the very depth of what he felt. The moment was broken by a soft knock on the door. Ilara's eyes flicked to the door, then back at Lucian. He followed her gaze. Kale stood there, calm, polite, but carrying a quiet confidence that seemed almost otherworldly. Lucian's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. The scholar stepped into the room, bowing slightly. "You summoned me, sir." "Yes," Lucian said, his voice smooth but cold. "I need to understand who you are and what you want." Kale's gaze was steady, but he did not meet Lucian's eyes directly. Instead, he glanced at Ilara, then back at Lucian. "I mean no harm. I only wish to learn and perhaps to help." Lucian's jaw clenched. Help. In his world, help was rarely offered without strings, and trust was a dangerous commodity. Yet, there was something in Kale's calm demeanor that made Lucian pause. Something familiar, as if the scholar carried a weight he could not yet understand. "You work for knowledge," Lucian said slowly, "and yet you place yourself here in my domain. Tell me, scholar, what would you do if this domain demanded more than your knowledge?" Kale's response was quiet but steady. "Then I would face it. As anyone must in the presence of power." Lucian's lips curled in the faintest of smiles, a dangerous, calculating smile. He had not expected such courage, nor such calm, yet it sparked something inside him, a storm he could neither suppress nor control. Ilara watched silently, her heart beating fast. She could feel the tension between the two men, the unspoken battle of wills, and something deep inside her stirred. For the first time, she wondered if Lucian's fear of losing her was more than just protection. Lucian stepped closer to Kale, closing the distance between them until only a few feet remained. The room seemed to shrink around the three of them, the air thick with unspoken emotions and dangerous possibilities. "You will leave no harm near her," Lucian said finally, voice smooth but firm, a promise and a warning wrapped in a single breath. "Do you understand?" Kale inclined his head. "I do, but so much rests on her own choices, does it not?" Lucian's eyes flickered, the briefest hint of vulnerability crossing his otherwise unreadable face. "Perhaps," he admitted, "but choices can have consequences." Ilara's gaze moved between the two men, sensing the currents of tension, protection, and something she could not yet name. She wanted to speak, to break the silence, but the weight of the moment held her tongue. The scholar bowed slightly, a gesture of respect, then stepped back. Lucian's eyes followed him until he was gone, and only then did the tension in the room begin to ease, though the storm inside Lucian raged on. When the door finally closed, Lucian turned to Ilara, his expression unreadable. For a moment silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of everything left unsaid. "Go home," he said at last, his voice low, almost a whisper. "But remember what I told you." Ilara nodded, her heart still racing, and left. Lucian watched her go, the empty room suddenly feeling colder than it had a moment before. He leaned back against his desk, closing his eyes, and allowed himself a single, dangerous thought. "I cannot let her go. Not to him, not to anyone." And in the darkened city below, the lights continued to flicker, shadows moving like whispers across the wet streets. But in the tower above, one man's heart had begun to betray him, and another's journey had only just begun. The night was far from over. The city was quieter than usual. He sat in the dim light of his office, high above the streets, staring at a map of the city's districts spread across the desk. His sharp fingers traced paths where his influence flowed, noting where threats might appear and where loyalty still held. Yet his thoughts were not on the city tonight. They were on Alara and on the stranger who had entered her life, Kale. Lucian could not stop thinking about him. The scholar's calm voice, his strange, quiet strength, even the subtle respect he showed for Alara, it all gnawed at Lucian in a way that made his chest tighten. There was no immediate threat, not yet, but Lucian had learned long ago that danger often came dressed as something harmless, sometimes even beautiful. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Alara entered, her footsteps light but deliberate. Her eyes held a mix of determination and unease. Lucian did not rise. He did not need to. The power in the room already declared itself in his presence. "Alara," he said, voice low, "you spent time with him again yesterday. Tell me what you saw." She paused, considering her words. He is different, sir. There is something fragile about him, but also strong. I cannot explain it. He carries something in him, something heavy, but he controls it well." Lucian's jaw tightened. He knew a dangerous presence when he saw one. "Fragile and strong are dangerous combinations," he said carefully. "He is not like the others who have crossed my path. This one, he could be a threat, even without intending to be." Alara looked down, silently acknowledging his concern. But in her heart, she felt an unfamiliar tension between loyalty to Lucian and curiosity about Kale. She had spent all her life understanding power, rules, and survival. Yet Kale stirred something she had never allowed herself to feel, gentle warmth untainted by fear or obligation. "You do not trust him," she said quietly. Lucian's eyes, sharp as winter frost, met hers. "I trust few," he said, "but trust is earned, not given freely. And some things cannot be trusted at all." Her brow furrowed. "Sir, what do you mean?" He leaned back, his gaze distant. "The world we live in, the world I built, is not the world he comes from. He carries a power, Alara, a power that could destroy or save. And that is not a choice I can ignore." Alara's heart skipped. She had never known Lucian to speak in such vague, almost poetic terms. "A power," she repeated. "What kind of power?" Lucian did not answer immediately. He did not need to. The silence said more than words ever could. Something was hidden in Kale's presence, something that even Alara could feel, a faint weight in the air, subtle but undeniable. The moment was broken by a soft tapping at the window. Lucian's eyes snapped toward it. Outside, the city shimmered under the early morning light. A figure stood on the balcony below, a messenger. He bowed slightly, passing a sealed envelope upward. Lucian caught it in one motion, slicing the seal with a silver blade. The paper inside was old, almost ancient, the edges frayed, the ink dark and sharp. "The scholar you have observed is marked. A curse follows him, one older than your empire. Beware." Lucian's eyes narrowed. He read it twice, then carefully refolded the paper. A curse. A weighty word, heavy with danger. He had dealt with curses before, but this one was different. It was not just superstition. This was real, tangible, and it was heading straight for Alara. "Alara," he said, voice sharp, "there is something you must know. Kale, he is not just a scholar. He carries something dangerous, something he cannot yet control." Her eyes widened, a mix of fear and disbelief. "A curse? But he seems so ordinary. He is kind, sir. How could he be dangerous?" Lucian stood, the sharp lines of his figure cutting through the dim light. "Kindness does not protect anyone from power, and power does not respect kindness. This curse, it could reach you through him without warning. That is why I need you to be careful. No one can protect you from it but me." Alara's throat tightened. She had always trusted Lucian, but now she felt a strange tug in her chest. It was not just fear, but longing and frustration and a spark of something deeper. "Sir, why do you care?" Lucian froze. The question hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. Care. He had not expected her to put it into words. He looked at her, studying her face, the way her hair fell over her shoulders, the way her eyes met his without fear. And in that moment he realized that he did care, not just because she was his assistant, not just because her safety mattered to his empire, but because she mattered to him in ways he had spent years denying. "I care," he admitted finally, voice low, almost a whisper. "And that is dangerous." Alara's breath caught. She did not press further, but she understood. Lucian's world was one of rules and power, where emotions were a liability. And yet, here he was, letting something as human as care slip through his defenses. The days that followed were tense. Lucian moved through the city like a shadow, ensuring that no threat reached Alara. Kale, unaware of the curse that followed him, continued his research, drawn to the old texts that spoke of forgotten pacts, ancient powers, and the delicate balance between life and darkness. He admired Alara's intelligence, her bravery, and her quiet strength, yet he remained cautious around Lucian, sensing the storm beneath his calm exterior. One evening, Alara found herself walking through the city with Kale, discussing a text he had uncovered. The streets glimmered with the soft glow of lanterns, and the night felt alive, full of possibility. But Alara's thoughts kept returning to Lucian, to the tension she had seen in his eyes, the way he had spoken of the curse and of care. Kale noticed her distraction. "You think of him often," he said softly, not as an accusation but as an observation. Alara paused, unsure how to answer. "I think about many things," she said finally, keeping her voice steady. "It is my duty to be cautious. It is part of the world we live in." Kale nodded, sensing her inner conflict. "Caution is wise," he said, "but it cannot guard the heart entirely." Alara's chest tightened. The words, gentle as they were, echoed something she had not admitted even to herself. The heart could not be controlled, not entirely. Not when faced with danger, power, or longing. Meanwhile, in his tower, Lucian watched from the shadows. Every step Alara took, every smile she gave Kale was etched into his mind. The jealousy he had felt before had deepened into something more complex, something that was not just desire, but a need to protect, to dominate the unknown threat, and perhaps to claim what he could not yet name. Lucian's network of informants soon reported unusual disturbances near Kale's usual locations. Strange shadows moved in unnatural ways, whispers carried on the wind, and an energy that Lucian recognized only too well, the stirrings of a curse. He felt it like a cold hand brushing his spine. The danger was real and it was growing. He left his tower in silence, moving through the streets in ways only a man of power could. The night seemed to bend around him, the air thick with the promise of confrontation. He arrived at the scholars' quarters just as the first signs of the curse manifested, a subtle, flickering distortion in the air, like the world itself bending unnaturally. Kale turned at the sound of movement, startled but composed. How did you?" Lucian's eyes, sharp and commanding, met his. "I warned you," he said simply. "Some things cannot be faced alone." Kale glanced at the shadows, then back at Lucian. "This is beyond me." Lucian stepped closer. "Then you will need guidance. Or this curse will claim more than you imagine, and she, Alara, will be caught in its path." Kale swallowed, understanding the gravity of the situation. And in that moment, Lucian realized that his fear was not just for the city or for the curse, but for the woman he could not let go. Alara appeared then, drawn by instinct or intuition, standing behind them with a torch in hand. Her eyes flicked between the two men, sensing the tension, the power, and the unspoken truths that hung like a heavy fog in the room. "You cannot face this alone," she said softly, voice steady but her heart racing. "None of us can." Lucian's gaze softened briefly, a flicker of the man who cared for her before hardening again with resolve. "Then we face it together," he said. "But you must understand, the path ahead is dangerous. Nothing will be easy. Nothing will be safe." The three of them stood in silence, the flickering torch casting long shadows on the walls. Outside, the city hummed with life, unaware of the storm about to break within its streets. And deep in the shadows, the curse stirred, waiting, patient and hungry. The night was only beginning. The city had grown quieter, almost as if it were holding its breath. But inside the shadows of the grand towers and narrow alleys, danger stirred. Lucien Vera had never felt so restless. Every step he took through the city was measured, every shadow scanned for movement. Yet his mind was not on territory, power, or enemies. His thoughts were consumed by Alara and by the strange, elusive presence of Kale, who carried the weight of a curse older than the city itself. Lucien returned to his penthouse as the sky darkened. The room was lit only by the faint glow of lanterns and the city lights below. He found Alara already there, seated near the window, her hands folded calmly, though her eyes betrayed unease. "You have seen it, haven't you?" Lucien asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Alara looked up. "The shadows, yes, but it seems different now, stronger, almost alive." Lucien's jaw tightened. He had been tracking the curse, sensing the subtle distortions it created, small tremors in the air, whispers at the edge of perception, shadows that refused to obey natural light. He had encountered dark forces before, but this was different. This one was not just destructive, it was cunning. "Kel cannot control it yet," Lucien said, "and I cannot let it touch you, not you." Alara's breath caught. She had heard the possessive edge in his voice before, but now it was sharper, more intense. She knew Lucien cared for her, but there was something deeper, almost terrifying in the way he claimed the right to protect her. "I will be careful," she said softly. "But sir, you cannot carry this alone. Neither can Kale." Lucien's sharp eyes studied her. "I do not ask for help lightly, but this, we face together whether we like it or not." The tension was interrupted by a quiet knock. Kale entered, carrying a small, leather-bound book. His eyes flicked to Lucien, then to Alara, careful to measure the storm he had stepped into. "The texts," Kale said quietly. "I have found something that may help. A ritual, an old protection, but it requires precision and trust." Lucien's lips pressed into a thin line. "Trust is a fragile thing, scholar. Misstep, and you risk more than your life." Alara's life hangs in the balance. Kale's gaze did not waver. "I understand." Alara stepped closer, her hands clasped in front of her. "Then we must trust him, and we must trust each other." Lucien's eyes narrowed, scanning her face for any doubt. He found none. And yet beneath her calm exterior, he sensed an emotion he could not name, curiosity, warmth, and a quiet defiance that refused to be tamed. It both intrigued and terrified him. "Very well," Lucien said, voice low, deliberate. "We prepare. But understand this, if the curse moves against us, we must act quickly. Hesitation will cost lives." Kale nodded, opening the book and tracing the faded symbols. "The ritual requires all three of us: concentration, trust, and focus. The curse feeds on doubt and fear. If any of us falters," Lucien's gaze fell on Alara. "You understand," she nodded, her voice steady. "I understand. I will not falter." The night deepened and the ritual began. Candles flickered in a circle, casting long, wavering shadows across the room. The symbols Kale had drawn glowed faintly, their power ancient and heavy. Lucien stood near Alara, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence, the strength coiled beneath his calm exterior. Kale chanted softly, invoking the old protections, his voice steady, almost hypnotic. As the ritual progressed, the air grew thick, charged with unseen energy. Shadows shifted unnaturally, curling and twisting as though alive. Lucien felt the weight of it pressing against him, a subtle reminder of the danger that had crept into their lives. He kept his gaze on Alara, ensuring that her focus did not waver. But it was not enough. A sudden tremor ran through the room. The symbols flickered and warped. The shadows deepened, stretching toward them like fingers. The curse had sensed their attempt to contain it. Kale's voice faltered for a moment and the air pulsed with dark energy. Lucien's hand shot out, gripping the scholar's shoulder. "Do not falter. Focus. Trust me." "Trust her?" Kale's eyes met Lucian's, and in that brief exchange an understanding passed between them, an acknowledgement of the shared responsibility, the unspoken danger, and the fragile bond that held them together. Alara stepped forward, placing her hands on the symbols. Her own energy flowed into the ritual, steadying the distortions, bending the shadows back. She felt Lucian's gaze on her, unwavering, and something deep inside her responded, a fierce, protective warmth that she could not suppress. The room trembled again, stronger this time. The shadows twisted violently, clawing at the edges of the light. Lucian moved instinctively, placing himself between the darkness and Alara. The instinct to protect surged through him, stronger than any fear, stronger than any command. "Focus," he barked, voice cutting through the chaos. "Do not let it touch her." Alara's heart pounded. She felt the energy press against her, felt the subtle hunger of the curse seeking weakness. But she drew on the presence of both men, the scholar's focus, the mafia boss's unyielding strength, and something shifted. The shadows recoiled slightly. The symbols glowed brighter. Kale's voice returned to its steady cadence. Slowly, imperceptibly, the room began to stabilize. Finally, with a surge of energy that left the air humming, the shadows dissipated, curling back into nothingness. The candles flickered, then burned steady. The room was silent, save for the soft, uneven breaths of the three who had faced the darkness together. Lucian lowered his hands, his gaze immediately seeking Alara. She stood tall, though her chest heaved with exertion. Their eyes met, and for a moment the chaos of the night, the danger, the unspoken tension, all of it, faded into something else. "Are you unharmed?" he asked, voice low, but his sharp eyes searched every inch of her. Yes," she replied softly. "Thanks to you and Kale." Lucian's jaw tightened. "Do not mistake my protection for anything else," he said, but the words lacked their usual bite. Beneath them an emotion lingered, something he had spent too long denying. Kale, sensing the shift in the room, remained silent, giving them the space they needed. Yet even he could feel it, the unspoken currents, the tension, the fire beneath the ice that was Lucian Vera. For hours they remained together in the room, planning, preparing, and watching. Outside, the city slept uneasily, unaware that its fate had brushed against forces far older and darker than it could comprehend. In the days that followed, the bond between the three grew, fragile but undeniable. Lucian found himself watching Alara in ways he had never permitted before, not with ownership, nor with the strict calculation of a mafia king, but with something rawer, more human. And Alara, though confused, found herself drawn to the intensity in his eyes, to the dangerous warmth that emanated from him. Kale, meanwhile, continued to research, learning more about the curse he carried and the responsibilities it demanded. He admired Alara's bravery and composure, and though he recognized the tension between her and Lucian, he could not help but feel that the bond between them was more than just obligation. It was something deeper, something that even he could not fully understand. One evening, as they prepared for another step in the protective rituals, the air in the penthouse shifted. The faint shimmer of darkness appeared in the corner of the room, subtle but unmistakable. The curse had returned. Alara stepped forward instinctively, but Lucian's hand caught her wrist. "Stay close," he commanded, his voice low but firm. "This is not something you face alone." Kale raised his hands, opening the book of rituals. "It's stronger now," he said. The curse senses fear, hesitation, or unspoken doubts. Lucian's eyes met Kale's. "We cannot falter, we cannot hesitate, focus. Everything depends on it." The shadows twisted again, curling toward them, but this time they faced it as one. Each movement, each chant, each breath was synchronized, an unspoken understanding binding them together. The curse shrieked softly, as if frustrated, before retreating once more into the darkness. Alara's gaze found Lucian's, and for the first time she saw the man beneath the power, beneath the myth. A man capable of care, of devotion, and perhaps even love. Lucian's hand brushed her hair, an unintentional gesture, and the air between them thickened. For a heartbeat, the world outside ceased to exist. He wanted to say something, to admit something that had remained locked away for far too long. But the danger still lurked, and words would have to wait. The curse had been held at bay, but its presence lingered, like a storm waiting beyond the horizon. And in that tension, in the quiet aftermath of chaos, the three of them understood one thing clearly. The path ahead would demand everything: trust, courage, and the willingness to face not only the darkness outside, but the fires burning within their hearts. And far above the city, in the silent tower, Lucian realized that some battles could not be won by power alone. Some required something far more dangerous: vulnerability. The city slept under a pale, restless moon. Its streets were quiet, but the air carried a tension as though the night itself anticipated something, an approaching storm. Lucian Vera moved through the shadows like a predator, silent, deliberate, every step measured. Tonight, the threat was not just the city, not just the curses lurking in dark corners. Tonight, the danger touched those he could not bear to lose: Ilara and the mysterious scholar Kale. The curse that Kale carried had grown stronger. Its power no longer stayed hidden in subtle distortions or fleeting shadows. It moved boldly now, manifesting as a dark, shifting presence, pressing against the edges of the city, seeking opportunity, testing strength. Lucian knew that failure would mean catastrophe, not just for the empire he ruled, but for the woman who had quietly become the center of his life. He arrived at Kale's quarters first. The scholar was waiting, his face tense but composed, the leather-bound book open on the table. Symbols shimmered faintly across the pages, drawing energy from the room itself. "It's worse than we expected," Kale said softly. "The curse has grown impatient. If we don't act now, it will spread beyond containment." Lucian's sharp gaze swept the room. "Then we act. And we act together. Do you understand the risk?" Kale nodded. "I do, but it is not only risk for me, it will reach her if we falter." Lucian's jaw tightened. "Then we cannot falter, not tonight." Ilara arrived, her steps careful but unwavering. The moment she entered, Lucian's sharp eyes softened just a fraction, enough to show the truth he had long denied. He could not face this without her. She stood beside them, gazing at the symbols and the faint, restless shadows creeping along the edges of the room. "You both understand," she said softly. "We face this together. Whatever happens, we face it as one." Lucian's lips pressed into a thin line. He did not speak, but his eyes, sharp, intense, conveyed the same promise, the same unspoken bond. Kale, sensing the tension, gave a small nod and the ritual began. Candles flickered in a circle. The room hummed with ancient energy. Kale chanted, invoking protections and control. Lucian moved with precision, guarding Ilara, ensuring that the shadows could not breach her. Ilara's hands traced symbols of her own, her energy blending with theirs, reinforcing the ritual. The curse struck suddenly. Shadows leapt across the room, curling and twisting like living things. The air became heavy, pressing against them with invisible force. The symbols on the floor flared, trembling under the strain. Lucian's voice cut through the chaos. "Hold your focus. Do not let it touch her." Ilara's heart pounded, but she did not hesitate. She drew on the strength she had discovered in herself, the bond she shared with Lucian, and even the quiet determination she had seen in Kale. Their energies intertwined, steadying the swirling darkness, holding it at bay. But the curse was cunning. It shifted, probing weaknesses, testing their concentration. Lucian felt the dark tendrils brushing against the edge of his mind, whispering fear, doubt, and anger. His first instinct was to crush it with sheer force, but he realized something critical. This was not a battle of strength alone. It was a battle of trust, of unity. "Focus on us," he said, voice low but unwavering. "Not fear, not doubt. Only this moment, only each other." Ilara's gaze met his. In that instant, a torrent of unspoken emotions passed between them: Fear, longing, care, and something more profound, more urgent than either had admitted. Kale's eyes followed theirs, understanding the silent connection forming, yet knowing it was not his to claim. The shadows recoiled, shrieking softly as the combined energy of the three pressed against the curse. Kale's chanting grew stronger, more precise. Alara's hands glowed faintly, radiating protective energy. Lucian moved around them both, his presence solid, unyielding, a wall against the dark. And then, with a sudden surge, the curse struck directly. The air warped violently, and the shadows surged forward, seeking Alara. Lucian's instincts overrode everything. He reached for her, pulling her behind him, letting no part of the darkness near her. For a heartbeat, the force of the curse pushed against him like a tidal wave, threatening to overwhelm his control. "You will not touch her," he shouted, and the words carried a weight that was more than command. They were raw, unfiltered emotion. The curse recoiled, startled by the force behind the declaration, and for the first time Lucian allowed himself a brief, dangerous truth. He could not lose her. Not to the darkness, not to anything. Kale seized the moment, channeling the ritual's final power. Symbols glowed brighter than ever, the air crackling with energy. Shadows writhed, then began to retract, curling back into nothingness. The pressure lifted, leaving the room trembling but intact. When the last ripple of darkness vanished, silence fell. The three stood together, panting, exhausted yet alive. Lucian's gaze immediately sought Alara, and she met it, steady and unbroken. "You are safe," he said finally, voice low, almost a whisper. "For now." Alara's chest heaved. "Thanks to both of you. I could not have faced it alone." Lucian stepped closer. The shadows of the room played across his sharp features, but his eyes softened, vulnerability peeking through the ice of his usual control. "You never face anything alone," he said, voice almost too low to hear. "Not while I am here." Alara felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of relief and something far deeper. She had always trusted him, but now she understood the weight of his care. It was more than protection, it was devotion, fierce and unyielding. Kale, sensing the intimacy of the moment, stepped back, quietly closing the book. His own burden was heavy, yet he could see that the connection between Lucian and Alara had deepened in ways even he could not alter. He bowed slightly, a gesture of respect, then left them alone. For a long moment, Lucian and Alara simply stood, the tension of the past days settling around them like dust. Finally, he spoke again, his voice low but deliberate. "Alara, I have been a man who trusted no one, who relied on nothing but power and calculation. But you have changed that. You have forced me to face something I never allowed myself to feel, and that is dangerous for me, for you, for everything I am." Alara's hands reached for his, tentative but steady. "Sir, I have seen you, all of you. I have felt your care, your strength, your willingness to protect. I trust you, not just with my life but with my heart." Lucian's eyes softened, the fire behind them now tempered by understanding. He took her hands in his, steadying them, grounding them both. "Then we face the future together. Whatever comes, we face it as one." Outside, the city's lights shimmered under the pale moon. It was still a place of danger, of shadows and whispers, but inside that quiet tower, two hearts had begun to beat as one. Lucian, who had once ruled through fear and control, had discovered something far more powerful: love, trust, and the willingness to be vulnerable. Days passed, and the remnants of the curse faded. Kale continued his studies, seeking to ensure that no trace of it would remain. He remained a presence in their lives, a reminder of the delicate balance between light and darkness, power and restraint. Lucian and Alara's bond grew stronger with each passing day. They moved together through the empire, not as master and assistant, but as partners in every sense. There were still dangers, still shadows that lurked at the edges of their lives, but they faced them together, each challenge strengthening the bond that had been forged in fire, fear, and unspoken longing. One evening, As the sun set and the city glowed in shades of gold and crimson, Lucian and Alara stood atop their tower, overlooking the streets below. The wind whispered through the high towers, carrying the faint scent of freedom and possibility. Lucian turned to her, his sharp eyes softened by warmth and something infinitely rare, hope. "We have survived much," he said, voice low, almost reverent. "And yet I feel this is only the beginning. There will be more challenges, more darkness. But whatever comes, we will face it together." Alara smiled, her hand finding his. "Together," she said. In that moment, the city below seemed less threatening, less cold. The shadows still moved, but they were no longer something to fear alone. They had faced darkness, conquered fear, and found trust, strength, and love in each other. Lucian's jaw relaxed for the first time in years. He allowed himself to believe, if only for a moment, that there could be more than power, fear, and control. There could be warmth, protection, and something far more enduring: redemption. Kale's work continued in quiet corners, ensuring that no remnants of the curse remained. He had sacrificed much, but he knew that his part in the story was done. For Alara and Lucian, a new chapter had begun, one built not on shadows, but on the fire that burned beneath ice, the strength found in trust, and the courage to love despite the dangers of the world. The night stretched before them, quiet now, filled with possibility. The city was still alive with whispers, still full of shadows, but inside the tower, two hearts had found their light. And for Lucian Vera, the man who had ruled through fear, who had trusted no one and feared vulnerability, that light was more powerful than any empire, any curse, or any shadow could ever be. Together, they would face the world. Together, they would survive. And together, they would create a story that would echo through the city streets, whispered in the shadows, told for generations as a legend of courage, trust, and love. The night was calm, but the promise of dawn hung in the air, a new beginning, forged from fire, shadows, and hearts unafraid.